Techniques we discuss here are meant for licensed wildlife professionals. If you aren't licensed and trained for wildlife rehabilitation, do not attempt to capture, hold, or rehabilitate any wild animal. If you find an injured wild animal, a wildlife professional can recommend next steps. Welcome to Wildlife Rehabilitation, Rescue to Release, a podcast dedicated to licensed wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians who support them. I'm your host, Gail Buhl. We'll tackle topics about rescue, care, management, reconditioning, and releasing wildlife found in North America. This is a deep dive into each subject. We hope to give rehabilitators information they can use because they're already going to great lengths to rescue and nurse animals back to health. An injured or orphaned wild animal's journey to restored health and independence in their natural habitat is delicate and complex. We draw techniques and expertise from many disciplines. Many animals brought into rehabilitation cannot be saved. The last gift we can give them is humane euthanasia. We will talk more about when this is necessary. Sometimes animals are deemed non-releasable and evaluated to be suitable for a life in captivity. When that happens, we shift to a long-term approach to managing their care, training, and housing. Some such animals serve as ambassador animals, a term for the animals that rehabilitators use to educate the public. Each episode will speak with experts who represent specialty topics across the profession of wildlife rehabilitation, ambassador animal care and management, showcasing best practices. Welcome back. This is the fourth and final part of my in-depth discussion with rehabilitator Debbie Sykes. Here we continue our deep dive into caring for white-tailed deer fawns and rehabilitation. We started off by talking about building a diet that will help prepare the fawn and the fawn's gut for survival on regional flora. Right. So you're definitely mimicking what is happening out in nature as far as like you said, the browse and the forbs and all of that kind of stuff.
Yes. And just to give you an idea, our protocol also matched that. Just to read it off, and from May to June, their diet was 40% forbs, the homegrowns, plus 50% leaves of, and we listed off the leaves that they could have. We also had a ID guide so people could see the leaf and the bark of the tree, just so they knew, oh, does this match this? Yes, they can have it. So they would get still 50% of that, the browse that you had to go out and hunt for. Then we grow a little bit of grass and some mushrooms as well. So that's another thing. And I promise I won't go on to my mushroom kick, but mycelium and mushroom. Gosh, I mean, it's so important. If you think about it, there's so much vitamin D in mushrooms that helps with immunity and different things like that. So mushrooms are just as important as well for them to have. Obviously not high numbers. They're not eating a whole lot of them in the wild, but especially in the fall time where there's a lot of mushrooms, great time to bring that in for them as well.
Awesome. Wow. As far as growing some of the grass and the forbs and the dirt, was that hard for the staff and volunteers to adopt, saying, hey, we're going to be doing this as well? That's one of my first questions. And then actually doing it. And where did you get the dirt? I mean, did you sterilize? You didn't sterilize the dirt. You don't want to sterilize it because you want those microbes. But where did you decide this is an okay place to get dirt and this isn't?
I would say it was a very small amount of hell for me. Thankfully, we had me, one other staff member named Josh, who was the most amazing man you've ever met in your life, and a volunteer named James. And we just went out. We had 4 different pins, and we just went out one day and pulled all the invasives out, spread all the seed, and then put tarps over it so none of the invasives could grow back. Before we did that, we tested the soil. So UT Extension, I'm sure the University of Minnesota probably has an extension agriculture that tests people's soil. We got it tested. They said, oh, you want to grow clover and forbs. This is what you need to put in: lime and phosphorus. And there was no diseases in our soil, so we didn't have to worry about that. And so we did that in a day. I think we had to do it in a day and a half because it was like 35 degrees and pouring rain. Yeah, I have a great picture of that experience. But after that, so that's how we did the outside enclosures. We just spent one day doing it. For the homegrown ones, James and I did that one as well, where we took all the black trays, put the dirt in, the seeds, and Josh was really good about keeping up with the watering. So it was a lot up front, but it ended up, after we put all the work in, it kind of sustained itself. Some people would bring them home to try to grow them so they could get a little bit more attention. And especially once, say, June, July hit and we had to replant the trays, that was like the hardest part, was, again, having people bring them home to do that. So I tried not to keep it at the center if it was going to be more than Josh just needs to water these plants.
Okay. Well, it makes sense, because that's, how do you maintain, how do you keep this going? When this is a change that you want to make, even though if everybody's on board with it, but you had a team.
Yeah. If you want to make the change, you're going to have to do all the work. That's the bad news. But there will usually be some great people that will help you, one or two. So
when you made these changes, did you see a change in the fawn mortality, the fawn release rate, those lesions you were talking about earlier?
I guess to give you a little bit more history, we would have about 50 fawns in one pin. And the pins were, each pin had different sizes.
Okay.
We had 2 different pins that were like 50 by 100, and then one that was 75 by 100. The first pins, the 50 by 100, were the ones we had used for years. And we just had those. We split them in 2. We'd put all the fawns in one side. And then as they ate all the grass, we opened it up and we put them all on the next side.
Okay.
As you would expect with the natural history, anytime you put that many animals together, they're pooping and eating their poop. And then there's the stress of having too many in one place. That's when we saw a lot of mortality. Since the mortality was so high year after year, we thought, okay, as we redo our fawn program, we can't use this wooden pen because it's contaminated. So we need to build another one. So the state helped us build another pen. That's a 75 by 100. That's the one we used. We tried to do it with a little bit less numbers. So instead of 50 in one, we divided like 25 and 25. Again, just as you would expect, that's way too many.
Mm-hmm.
But I talked the director into letting us use the wooden pins. So we used each side. So we had 50 by 100 on one side, 50 by 100 on the other side. Instead of opening it up halfway through, we just kept them in those pins the whole time. And then we also used our new pins, the 75 by 100, split that into 3 and kept the fawns in those the whole time. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. You had smaller numbers in slightly smaller spaces.
Yeah. I mean, it was about the same space.
Okay.
It just like we weren't opening it and then letting them to the.
They got the space they got. They didn't.
Yes.
They didn't get, okay.
But not only, before we made all these changes, there was just a bunch of invasive, I don't know if they're called skunkweed, but that's what we called them. There was a bunch of that, and they don't eat that. And so they had a bunch of food. They were surrounded by a lot of food they couldn't eat. We replaced that with the forbs and the clover with stuff they could eat. And we found that, they were definitely eating that. They had smaller numbers. So yes, we did notice a difference, but it's hard to say. I think it was a huge mix between the social stress and the nutrition.
And it often isn't just one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's often a mix of things, different percentages of stuff. So excellent. So dirt. Let's go back to dirt. because who doesn't want to talk about dirt more?
I love dirt. So you can test dirt as well. Well, it's obvious, I know, but I didn't think about it at the time. The plants that you grow are only as healthy as the soil that you put them in. So I would get soil from different areas. In Nashville, we don't have issues with CWD. We know, of course, that CWD can stick inside the soil like clay, but we don't have to worry about that here. So I was able to get it from creeks from my backyard, and it wasn't a whole lot. Like we mixed maybe a bucket of dirt with a couple bags of soil. So there was enough to have microorganisms, mycelium, insects, all those different things to mix in with the dirt.
Okay. And for anyone listening, CWD, of course, is chronic wasting disease, which I was hoping we have a chance to talk about briefly in a little bit, but and that's great that it's not in Tennessee because it is in Minnesota.
Well, I should say it's not in Middle Tennessee. It's in West Tennessee.
Tennessee. Okay. So let's, unless we want to talk about dirt some more, because it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I would just like to reinforce the fact that, I mean, it is so important to include healthy dirt. You don't want to get dirt from an old farm where they've kind of regrown the same crops over and over again and put a lot of stuff in the soil. You want the soil from the area that you see deer in, right? Where they're foraging on certain things, because we know that ground has good nutrition, if that makes sense.
Yep. So then every year, or how often do you was it pans of dirt that you put in there, or did you incorporate it into the soil that was already in the pens? Or did you just put up pans of them and then every year you got new pans, or every month, or?
Good question. After we tested the soil outside and we fixed it up, that was it for the year. So there was the soil, we grew those plants. Mm-hmm. And then for the indoor black trays, we would just mix it in. So we made a bunch of different trays at once. It'd be like 20 or 30. And it all had that dirt.
Okay. Awesome. Excellent.
And there was occasionally, I believe we did actually just put a pan of dirt in a couple of the rooms, but it wasn't like a huge protocol thing. It was just, let's try this,
Okay. What I like about this approach as well is that it is pretty holistic, and it is really based on natural history as best as you can as a wildlife rehabilitator.
Yeah. I mean, and that's for every animal too. I work primarily with box turtles now. We make sure they get dirt because they're close to the ground. They have such a big relationship. If they're eating plants, they're consuming dirt. And that's got to be a huge part of their natural history. It's got to be important for them in their gut.
Right. And I like that word relationship with it. They have a relationship with it. And I like that a lot. That it's a great way to think about it. As far as when you're trying to figure out, if you're just starting out and thinking, I'm going to do rehabilitation on deer, I'm going to raise deer fawn, where do I start? You start with the natural history, but you think about all these different relationships, and part of it is with the soil and the forbs and all these other kinds of things, and the seasons, right? Just, it's fascinating and I love it. Okay. So we've talked about dirt. We've talked about growing forbs and percentage of browse to forbs and things like that. I do want to kind of go back a little bit, and I want to ask, so when the fawns come in and they're separated out into their groups and in their rooms, those indoor rooms, if I were to walk into one of those rooms, describe it to me. What's on the floor? How many windows? What kind of noises do I hear? I mean, what's going on? What does it look like?
Noises are huge, and you want to make sure you're very sensitive to where you're putting them. You don't want a fan near them or anything like that. A fan can cause a huge amount of stress. for them, white noise, like the refrigerator, different things like that. So we put them out into a separate room. So we had like our rehab center, and then you go outside into another weird add-on room that we built. So we kept them in 2 suites in there. But you walk into the room and you have mats on the ground. These mats we had half of them were kind of like donated through the Titans, the Nashville Titans. It's a football team. And they
clarified that because sorry, I'm not into football. So
I'm not either. Yeah, I'm not either. So it's like their old gym flooring. So that's part of it. We also had some like more astroturfy stuff that was easy to hose off. And so that was covering the entire floor. We'd have trees that we held up with the cement blocks. So they'd have like things that they could hide behind. They'd have crates, a couple of big crates with pads in them with soft bedding that they could hide in. We pulled them up just enough that they could go behind the crates and hide as well. So making sure we provided them with plenty of that. We tried to raise the water dishes so they couldn't like walk in the water with their poopy feet and then drink it. We'd also offer them the forbs. So there'd be the little black trays, again, raised, and then a small dish of grain, but that was a very small part of their diet, just like a Purina chow.
And windows in the room, not windows in the room?
The way it was set up, there were no windows in the room. There was a small skylight, but I'm talking very small, just so they could get light. But yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So then when they transferred outside, we talked a little bit about the sizes of the spaces and a little bit of the treatment of the soil, the growing of the forbs and all of those kinds of things. But give me a picture of, just pick one of the spaces and kind of what are the characteristics of that space. The walls are solid, it slats, how much sun, all those kinds of things.
I won't talk about our wooden barn because it was literally falling apart. So the newer ones were fence.
So like chain link fence?
Yes, there we go. Thank you. Chain link fence that we put on the inside and the outside, a kind of a tarp so they couldn't see through, but also so they couldn't get their legs stuck in the chain link. So It kind of resembled a solid wall just because it was a double layer of that tarp, but they also weren't in any danger.
Okay.
From there, it's Nashville, Tennessee, so we have so much greenery here. There are plenty of natural growing small bushes and plants that they could hide behind, so we didn't have to provide anything like that. But we also did a kind of a stand-up, what do you call those, like tarps that have like a roof?
Tent?
Okay.
A tent?
That seems like a really easy word. So yeah, they'd have a tent in case the weather got really bad. We do have tornadoes, high winds, things, very heavy rains in the summertime. So we protected them from that. And then again, the forbs are everywhere. So they have plenty of chance to eat forbs and grass. And we brought in the browse and we try to hang it. That kind of fell off as the season got busier though. So we try to keep it off the ground.
Okay.
As the summer got busier, it turned into people just throwing it over the fence onto the ground.
Oh, so, okay. So also no roof, right? It's open.
The tent. We had that tent.
You had the tent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other than that, yeah, it was completely open to all the elements.
Okay. Okay.
And it was about, I would say, at least 10 feet tall, the fence. Yeah. And we didn't have anything going under, but we did have an electric kind of fence line so that predators
protection. So you did that with electric fence?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You didn't have to worry too much. Was that at the, low level? Was it for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did it a couple of feet back, maybe 3 feet back. So enough to where, a predator might come to jump over. We made sure the line would hit it so they couldn't get that close to be able to jump over it.
Okay. All right. Wow. Excellent. And that the newer enclosures, would there be anything that if you could have all the resources in the world for an enclosure, for example, would you build something similar, or how would you change what?
In my ultimate vision.
In your ultimate vision.
My ultimate vision, it would be a moving fence. So, of course, when it comes to any disease, if you have an animal that's meant to, whether it's cows or sheep or whatever, if they're pooping where they're eating for long periods of time, A, that's not going with a natural history, and B, that's where you introduce disease. So it'd be great to be able to have a system where, whether it's like you move them from one fence to another, or you have like an actual moving fence, that would be ideal. Of course, then you have to worry about home ranges and things like that. Like you want to keep it similar to their natural history, but being able to allow them to get more space, I think would be ideal.
Okay. I did want to talk just briefly about chronic wasting disease. You have it just now in one part of the state. We have it in several parts of the state. Mm-hmm. It is a prion disease, which it's easily spread between deer by touch. And it has, certainly they think some of the spread can be through the soil and from the uptake into plants. And it's incredibly persistent, also in the soil. So
for years too.
For a very long time. So, and it doesn't show up in fawns as far as the few studies that I've looked at, not until they're at least between 5 and 9 months old. But there's not as many studies with fawns as there are with other life stages of white-tailed deer. And then, of course, it doesn't just affect white-tailed deer, but that's what we're talking about here. So are there any other, CWD, I'm sure, is a concern for you going forward and for the state, I'm sure. Are there other diseases that you are concerned about? We talked about some of the things that you wormed the fawns for, but
yes,
are there other diseases that you worry about? And or what are your thoughts about chronic wasting disease?
Well, we have, I am very particular. I very much respect our TWRA captive care coordinator, Walter Cook, who I know you've met because he comes to all the National Wildlife Rehabilitator Association conferences. So we've talked about it. And when it showed up in West Tennessee, he very much took action and talked to other states and figured out what are things that went wrong that you would like to change, what are things that you did like. So in the Tennessee state plan for chronic wasting disease, he's got he wrote most of it himself. I sound like Walter talking about himself, but he did such a good job that he keeps it in West Tennessee. We're not allowed to rehab in that area, but generally we're talking, that's like 4 to 5 hours away from us. So we try not to take, West, Middle, and East Tennessee, try to stay pretty separate. So we stay away from the counties that have any type of positive. They also just hired like 5 full-time state officers to strictly deal with that. They have an incinerator, which I know it has to be a certain temperature to actually even kill it. Like you can't just light it on fire for it to go away. So they're working really hard to make sure it contains in that area. I'm not too concerned with it now, but I think as long as people maintain good practice, if we have a situation that we were in years ago where we're putting 50 fawns in a pen, that's asking for trouble. But if we keep up with best practices, that's not something I'm concerned with at all.
Okay.
As far as other diseases, my God, we went through a list of them all when they were dying. But one of the things that we thought was EHD, and epizoonotic hemorrhagic disease.
Mm-hmm.
So that's spread by flies that bite. But, that's what we thought we were dealing with for a couple of years. But again, that tested negative. So we weren't actually dealing with that. Cryptosporidium, which I touched on before, another parasite where you're seeing a lot of bloody diarrhea, lethargy, basically losing fawn. All you can do is supportive care to help get them through it. But I believe it like maintains in their system, so you're not fully getting rid of it. It just comes out in periods of stress. And so what I have learned from when we changed everything is if you keep, the less stressed you keep them, whether it's making sure they have the nutrition and the protein that they need, so they're not stressed out nutritionally, they're not stressed out socially, there's not too many of them, they have enough food, water. As long as we keep the conditions good, we don't have to worry about disease. There was one year where we thought maybe it was a coccidia outbreak because there's a lot of coccidia on the fecals. And again, coccidia is normal in their gut for the 4-chambered stomach. But as they get stressed out, then you'll see that, just like with any kind of parasite, you'll see it start to take over. Mm-hmm. And so we were giving them Corid, which is something you put in the water to treat coccidia every single day. And then they got thiamine deficiency. When in reality, we're trying to treat these symptoms, but it's a bigger picture. So I would encourage, if you do see a lot of something in your facility, just to make sure, take a step back to ensure like, oh yes, we're meeting all of their needs, so they're not stressed out.
Okay. We've kind of gone through beginning stages of rehab in the room, outside. Now we're ready for release.
Yeah.
How do you decide? Or is it, look, this is the date, this is the state that you got to release them in this time frame, and that's it. And then step by step, how do you do it?
We did it. So we did have, 100, I think it's 180 days we have to rehabilitate deer, which puts us at, actually, I think it's less, I'm sorry, but we have to release them usually, I can't remember the week of that hunting season opens, but it is that week that we start to release our deer. Of course, they have to be off, or they are off the bottle at that point. Which, side note, when I was doing a lot of research, there are fawns that into their first 9 months are still suckling on mom, and mom's trying to kick them off. So yeah. But we would feed them in a trailer. So we'd have one side of the fence that we could open up and put a trailer into. We'd feed them some of their favorite stuff. It just depending on the year, maybe acorns, grain, whatever is appropriate and they're really going for. So we fed them in the trailer until they were all coming into the trailer. And then as they were consistently doing that, someone would hide behind the doors and close them in.
Close them. But this is a horse trailer or a livestock trailer?
It is probably a livestock trailer. It doesn't have, they can't see out of it. It's pretty closed off. There's no windows, but it's a little bit of air. This is not ideal. So we do have to hard release our deer because the public can't come into contact with them at all for soft release. So if we did soft release, it'd have to be on a special property where there's no public. And, there's a lot of things that would have to go into it. So we weren't able to soft release, but that is an ideal situation where you keep them in a pen for, at least, I would say 72 hours, I think was one study. But realistically, the longer you keep them in a decent pen and then kind of soft release them, the better their success rate is. So there are some rehabbers that are able to release on their property. Mm-hmm. We can't do that because we don't have a property that supports deer. And because then we'd have, 70 deer on our property. And
right.
But they did find, I've done a lot of studies, if you hard release the deer, that it's near a 0% success rate. just because you open the door, they're all scared. They scatter. They get hit by cars. They found predation as well, some disease. But and you also think about their social structures. We're already messing with that in rehab a little bit. But if we just release a bunch of males and females together, they don't have a good solid group to protect them, versus a soft release where they're a little bit calmer when you open up the doors, and they can investigate what's going on. And that one has, I think, one of the studies said like a 60% I think mortality rate, which if you think about fawns, from birth to that age, that's about equal to what they are experiencing.
And that's to be successful then, because you're matching the conspecifics. But with the hard release, and if there's such a high mortality rate, now granted it might only be one study, and we know from natural history that the fawns can stay with the doe for a long time, and she certainly can help protect them from other deer, or allow them to get food at certain sources where other deer might chase them away. With knowing that and doing hard releases, is there thoughts to reviewing the protocol for raising fawn at all? Like either transferring them to somebody else that can do soft release, or just saying, yeah, we can't do them because we know that
would be best case scenario, is transferring them immediately to someone who could do it. We do have, so TWRA releases our fawns. We don't. For Nash, or for Walden's Puddle, and I'm not sure about East Tennessee, but I know for our facility, a TWRA officer at Tennessee Wildlife.
TWRA is what?
Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency officer released our deer. So we never did it on our own, but they took it to a place where they thought they would thrive. There was no hunting, and they have reported seeing these deer. It's the same place each time, year after year. So I know there's not 100% mortality rate in these situations, but I know the one thing that would make it better would be if we could potentially soft release. I don't know, I don't do white-tailed deer anymore yet, but it's not something that I am in talks with them. As NWCC grows and we can start to accept deer, that will be something that we talk about, is potentially just putting in a pin to keep them in for a few days so that we can release them. But I do think there should be some monitoring of the rehabilitated deers. This is a potential research project, but just to see their social structure, because we know what it is for non-rehabilitated deers, but we have no idea how it affects.
Right. Are the fawns marked in any way, like ear tags or anything like that?
They are tattooed. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have that, but you can't tell that from afar, right? But yeah. but that certainly is something. So,
and I think it will be important too, as CWD. It'd be great if all the states kind of took the necessary actions to prevent it, but since they're not, we know it's going to spread. It seems like this is really important research for getting the populations back up.
Yeah. Yes, I totally agree. Having some research projects with a lot of the fawns that rehabilitators get in that have to be euthanized, but also or die in care, and or the ones that do get released. There's too bad there's not any ante-mortem tests for CWD. There's only post-mortem tests, so it's very difficult to test live fawns or live deer for CWD, unfortunately. But hopefully that will be coming with science. So
yes, yeah. Right now it's just looking at the brain for the sponge-like appearance. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe that. And yeah, there's certain places, lymph node and someplace else. And nobody quote me on that because I don't know it for sure.
Gail.
Quote me on that, on where they have to test for it. But what are there some, you mentioned some resources. So are there very specific resources that you would recommend that people would go to if they're wanting to improve what they're doing with fawn, or they want to get into it and they want to do a little bit more reading?
Yes, I have a lot of ideas, but for sure, look at wild deer. It's a great excuse to take walks at your local park, but really watch them and see what you can learn just from watching them. How are they interacting? What do they look like when they're not stressed out? Of course, in captivity, they're going to be stressed, but we want to make sure that we can mitigate that as much as possible. So making sure, body language of a calm versus a little more stressed out. What are they eating? What are their preferences? What does their poop look like? Different things like that is going to be really helpful. I spent a lot of time with that. That's how I figured out they usually eat more of the honeysuckle in the spring than they do in the fall. And what they were eating, like I was mentioning with the forbs. Also, if you have a good conservation hunter, I was lucky enough to find Michael Butler with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, who led me to other people. But if there's a state wildlife federation, those would be great people to talk to get more information. And then, the University of Pennsylvania has a great deer program. They have a lot of information. And I found UT, there's a guy named Craig Harper. He was the one that taught me about the nutrition. He has a book called
University of Tennessee.
UT. Yes, sorry.
I wanted to make sure. It wasn't like I was thinking Utah. No, that's not right.
So his name's Craig Harper. He did wildlife food plots. I think it's called common sense wildlife food plots, but it has all the different things you can grow for different animals. I stay away from corn. I try to stick to the other things like clover and different things like that. So he lays out the nutrition of those things, and just it made it really easy to figure out what to grow. Wildlife foods for wildlife is great because we were able to figure out, okay, what do they like and what does it match with Craig Harper's book. So Wild Foods for Wildlife, for those that don't know, is run by an awesome lady who basically tracks the preferences of wild foods and how, if wildlife likes them, if they eat them, if it's incorporated into their diet. And it's just such a good resource. So we were able to figure out what do they like to eat and go from there. Because there's a lot of stuff that has high protein, but tastes terrible. So they don't eat it.
If it's not palatable and they don't, the nutrition content doesn't matter.
No, exactly. And then of course, for whitetail deer, Biology and Management of Whitetail Deer is a must-read book.
And that I'm assuming is still in print, or we can.
Yeah, I went to Vital Source. It's just a website where you can rent books for a certain amount of days. I think the textbook might be over $100, but you can get it online for 30 days, 60 days, half a year, and it changes the cost. So it'd be more affordable that way.
Okay. Vital Source, you call those.
And then my favorite resource, if you have any friends in vet school, you can get access to their university library to read scientific articles. So I was able to get a bunch of different scientific articles because my friend was in vet school at Cornell.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's a really great idea for not just whitetail deer, but for lots of other things. Friends at vet school. So it's awesome. And universities. So what would you like to leave our listeners with? What are the things that you would like them to really take away from?
I think the biggest thing I took away from my experience was if somebody tells you that a certain animal they're just hard to rehabilitate or they all just die, to realize that that's not necessarily the case, to kind of bring it into that behavior perspective, you're putting that behavior in them. You're not looking at the environment. So take a step back and look at the actual environment, look at what we're giving them, and how you can change it. But other than that, I would say definitely give them dirt and forms, and then just make sure you're managing the stressors so that, we're not dealing with social stressors. They're getting the space they need and the enrichment they need to really thrive.
Okay, awesome. And are there other rehabilitators, maybe not by name, but the other rehabilitators that you used as resources when you were kind of down this journey that helped you as you were trying to figure this out? And it's just pretty much yes or no, right? I mean, it's the networking question.
Yeah, not really, just because they're so busy. So I would try to reach out to quite a few of them, but I think in order to really help somebody, you have to see a lot more than what you're going to get through email. And I found that there just wasn't anyone that I could reach out to that was able to take that time.
Sure. Yeah. So have you ever thought about writing a book about this?
No. Nope. I'll write a protocol and I'll put it out there. But I mean, and again, the protocol that I designed was tailored towards a facility that sees a lot of animals. It's going to be different if you're a home rehabber that just does fawns. You can take a lot more fawns and do things a little bit differently. But yeah, okay. Happy to share the protocol.
Okay. Well, I'll be following up with you on that, Debbie.
Great. Just do it before March, before busy season.
Busy season. So Debbie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to all of us about fawns, white-tailed deer fawns, and raising them, and some of the joys and the pitfalls and the journey that you went through to try to improve the rehabilitation of fawns in Tennessee.
My pleasure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Oh, you are so welcome. And thank you everyone for listening. Really appreciate you joining us on this journey on this white-tailed deer fawn podcast. Thanks so much, and talk to you soon. I hope you enjoyed my in-depth talk with Debbie about white-tailed deer fawn. Oh, and by the way, they have a really cool scientific name, Otocoileus virginianus. Next episode, we shift focus back to raptors. Lori Arndt, Assistant Director of the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota, joins me to talk about creance flying. Now, creance flying is a way to recondition a raptor in preparation for release. We will learn about the history of creance flying in relation to the ancient sport of falconry, but more importantly, we will learn about the science of creance flying. The whys and hows are fascinating. Lori even weaves sports physiology into the mix. It's a multi-part discussion on an important aspect of rehabilitating birds of prey, so I hope you'll tune in. This was another episode of Wildlife Rehabilitation Rescue to Release. We're glad you joined us today. Wildlife Rehabilitation Rescue to Release is a production of Partners for Wildlife, working hand in hand with wildlife rehabilitators and veterinarians to improve the welfare of orphaned, ill, and injured wildlife. Our executive producer is me, Gail Buhl. I'm the Partnership Coordinator for Partners for Wildlife at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine's Raptor Center. Our producer is Kirk Klocke. To learn more about the Raptor Center and Partners for Wildlife, visit raptor.umn.edu. Are you interested in becoming a licensed wildlife rehabilitator? Visit the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association website at nwrawildlife.org for resources to get started. And remember, if you do find an injured or orphaned animal, please contact a licensed wildlife rehabilitator in your area. And that's our show. Hope you'll join us next time.